Welcome to Take Two with Freddy. Real talk about second chances, real life, and the power of rewriting your story. I'm Freddy Freundlich, entrepreneur, mentor, storyteller. And here's the deal. If I didn't walk it, I don't talk it. Each week, we spend a little time together, laughing, reflecting, and hopefully walking away a little more aware, a little more grounded perhaps, and maybe even a little more in control of what really matters. So what's on my mind today? I guess what's on my mind is this question. Why do we wait to start over? Let's think about this for a moment. Why is it that when life doesn't go exactly the way we hoped, when we quit something, when we feel we failed at something, when life knocks us for a long loop, we often tell ourselves that one day we'll start over. Maybe next week, maybe after the holidays or next month, maybe when the kids move out, business settles down, we have more money, all sorts of stuff, let's say. But what does all that even mean? What does it mean to really start over? I thought about it. The more I realized that maybe starting over is one of the biggest myths we tell ourselves. Let me explain. Imagine you're climbing a mountain. It doesn't matter whether it's a small mountain or Mount Everest. You begin the climb and you're excited. You're motivated, you're moving upward and everything is going great. Then something happens. You start to get tired. You get a little discouraged, distracted, maybe even scared. And so you stop. Now, if you make camp and continue the next morning, nobody would call that starting over. You're simply continuing. But what if you return all the way back to the bottom? What if you quit? And what if you don't come back for a while? A few months, a year, 5 years? But then one day you decide to return. So most people would say to you, you're starting over. But I ask, are you really? Because here's a challenge I have with that idea. You may be standing at the bottom of the same mountain all over again, but you're not the same person who stood there the first time. You're very different now. You know more, you have more experiences, you've discovered things about yourself. Practically speaking, maybe you've learned what equipment you really need, what mistakes to avoid, when you're the most vulnerable, and perhaps where your fears are going to show up. The point is this. You're not starting from scratch. You're starting from experience. And that changes everything. Think about that for a moment. Every success you have, every failure, every disappointment, every relationship, any lesson along the way, a wrong turn, a scar, all this kind of stuff, you carry all of that with you. So maybe, yes, you're standing at the bottom of the mountain again, but you're certainly not the same person who stood there the first time. So as I share this with you guys, when I look back at my own life, I see countless examples in my business ventures, relationships, dreams, my goals, my projects, all sorts of stuff. Things I started, things I stopped. Things I thought I'd completely abandon. For years, I found that I was carrying around a label that I didn't particularly like. I was called a procrastinator. I don't know if you're familiar with that word, okay? But a procrastinator, and I did look up the definition, it's delaying something despite knowing there may be negative consequences. So I was called a procrastinator. And worse yet, I found I started to believe it. I started calling myself a procrastinator as well. And maybe some of you can relate. I felt I was getting to the habit of starting things and not finishing them. Or again, that's what I was led to believe. Now, procrastination is certainly real, and I'm not going to argue about it. But over time, I've come to believe that most procrastination comes from one of two places. Either we're afraid or we really don't want to do it. Now, perhaps this is not always popular to say, but when I honestly look at my own life, that's what I see. Many of the things that I supposedly procrastinated, they were things that I didn't really want them. They were things somebody else thought I should want. As I've done many times before, both in my books and on a podcast and throughout my career, I often refer to what I consider as the man, the authority figures, the teachers, the bosses, the experts, the people who always think they know what success should look like. For me, the man has his own plan. The man thinks I should do this, I should become that. The man thinks success should look a certain way. Problem was that many times I didn't actually want what the man wanted. So I did delay and I resisted and I found excuses. But then I would beat myself up for procrastinating. But here's what I've noticed. The things I truly wanted, I usually found a way. Maybe not immediately. And maybe it wasn't so easy. And maybe I was afraid. But eventually I found a way. For example, take this podcast. Actually, I shouldn't even say this podcast, because the idea of a podcast had been sitting in my head for years. I imagined it, I talked about it, I dreamed about it, and I thought about it over and over again. But yet I had every logical reason in the world not to do it. First of all, I wasn't a podcaster, and I knew nothing about it. I wasn't a sound engineer, I wasn't a media personality. I didn't have a roadmap, and that caused me to have doubts and fears and insecurity. But eventually something changed. I made a decision. And that's an important distinction. Before that moment, it was a dream, a fantasy, an idea. But the moment I made a decision, it became a goal. And my friends, goals move. Dreams inspire, but goals create actions. You see, dreams are great, but they're about tomorrow. Goals start today. And the moment I made this decision, things started happening. Again, not perfectly, not quickly, but they started happening. And I recorded my first episode. Honestly, I don't think it was very good, at least not compared to what I can do today. But that's okay, because the goal was never perfection. The goal was to do it, to get started. The goal, in other words, was getting on the mountain. So now here we are. We're more than 30 episodes later, and I do a podcast. I do a podcast where I have people all over the world listening. They're sending me messages and reaching out. And more important than anything else, people tell me that they're connected, that something I said resonated with them. And that, my friends, is incredibly humbling. Now, I do ask myself, could I have started this 5 years earlier? And the answer is absolutely. Would there have been opportunities along the way which I didn't get because I didn't start earlier? Definitely. And that's how I used to think. But I don't spend a lot of time living there anymore, because I have found that life happens in the present. The past can definitely teach us and educate us, but it can create today's opportunities. What matters is now, the present. And here's the interesting thing. Even during those years when I wasn't podcasting, I was still doing something. I was sharpening the stone. I just didn't realize it. You see, folks, every business challenge I had, every interaction I had, the books I wrote, my successes and my failures, all these conversations, all these lessons, I was sharpening the stone. And for many of us, preparation often looks like inactivity. I want to repeat that. Preparation often looks like inactivity. From the outside, it may appear that nothing is happening. And sometimes from the inside, it also feels like nothing is happening. But life has a way of preparing us. We just don't recognize it until later. If you'll think about your own life, maybe you've been thinking about something, about starting a business or changing careers. Maybe even you'd like to write a book or something more personal. You'd like to repair a relationship. You'd like to improve your health. Or maybe, and I find this to be very common, maybe you've been thinking about taking a chance on something you've avoided for years. You may be in a position today that you feel like you've wasted time, like you're behind, especially when you seem to look at everybody else and think they've moved ahead. But let me ask you a question. What if this is simply not true? What if you've been sharpening your stone? I mentioned the podcast. Well, I had a similar story with my first book, Born on the Right Side of the Tracks. That was a difficult book for me to write for many reasons. First of all, I wasn't a writer. At least I didn't think I was. I certainly had never written a book. I didn't feel I was academically prepared for it. In fact, if you knew my school history, you'd probably laugh at the idea of me becoming an author. But yet, I was carrying around this story for years, not months, years. I knew there was a story inside of me, but I didn't know there was a writer inside of me. I wanted to tell that story. I wanted to share my journey. But I kept waiting for that perfect time. Then one day, through what I can only describe as divine providence, a friend of mine gave me a little kick in the backside. And she asked me a simple question. Why don't you write a book? And even though I had thought about it, for whatever reason, something clicked and I started writing. How? One page at a time. That's it. One page. Then another page, another page. And yes, I got help. I learned as I went along. I learned what I needed to do, what the next step to take was. But long story short, no pun intended, I eventually finished the book. And if you ask me today, what is one of the most important milestones of my life? Writing that book is certainly near the top of that list. Now, could I have written it earlier? Probably. And I certainly would have liked to. But timing is timing. I wrote it when I was ready. And all those years before weren't wasted. I was sharpening the stone. Now, please don't misunderstand me. This isn't an excuse to wait forever. Because eventually there comes a moment when it's time to act. Eventually you have to take the first step. You have to leave that comfort of planning and researching and imagining, because at some point the mountain doesn't care how prepared you are. You have to start the climb. But when you do start the climb, remember this, you're not starting from zero. You're starting from experience. And that's a very different thing. One of the biggest mistakes I see people make is focusing on the entire journey at once. The goal becomes too big, it's too overwhelming. If I had focused on having a book launch party, I probably would have quit before I started. It was too big. If I'd focused on recording 30 plus podcast episodes, I probably wouldn't have started either. It was too much. I couldn't see that far ahead. But I learned something important, again, on the way from my experience as I was sharpening the stone. And that is to focus on the next step, just the next step. You want to make $1 million? Focus on the next deal, the next sale. You want to write a book? Focus on the first page. You want to improve your health? Focus on what you can do right now, today. Same with a relationship. Focus on what you can do today. I want to share another story with you guys. Many of you know I've been happily married for several years now. What some of you may not know, that it is my second marriage. And a few years before I met my wife, I met another woman online, a really wonderful woman, smart, kind, a genuinely great person. And we went out a few times, and we quickly realized that although we really liked each other, there was absolutely no chemistry, none, zero. But we continued the friendship. A few years later, that same woman introduced me to my wife. Now tell me that doesn't hit something there. If I had tried to write that story myself, I never would have written it that way because it's too bizarre. But that brings me to another belief I hold. Everything is an opportunity. Now, not everything feels like an opportunity. Some opportunities arrive disguised as disappointment or as rejection. Some arrive disguised as failure. But if we pay attention, there's usually something there. What? I'm not sure. A lesson or a relationship, some kind of realization. Or maybe it's just a chance to grow, a chance for us to slightly become a better version of ourselves. Now, the truth is, we often don't recognize that opportunity until much later. So, if you're listening today and you've been telling yourself you'll start over someday, I'd like to invite you to reconsider that idea. Maybe it's not about you starting over. Maybe it's just about that right now you're building experiences and you're sharpening your stone. I'm willing to bet you're already farther up the mountain than you think. The only thing you need to do today is to take the next step. But that's the kicker, today. Not tomorrow, not next year, but today. Because there is no such thing as a perfect beginning. There never was, and there never will be. But what you have right now today is enough. And I want to thank you once again for spending your time with me today. And if something in this episode resonated with you, please share it with someone else, someone who might need to hear it. And remember, you don't have to start over. You're not starting from scratch. You're starting from experience. This is Freddy. And remember, if I didn't walk it, I don't talk it. Until next time, keep moving forward. Keep sharpening that stone. Take care.